I think the first thing we have to do is create certainty for our businesses. Now, I've talked to hundreds of small business owners, and when we talk about business and unemployment in upstate New York, so much of it are these small businesses. We've got to create certainty for them. Certainty includes letting them know how the Affordable Care Act is going to affect them, knowing what their tax rates are going to be, knowing what regulations that the government's going to impose. That uncertainty is really the enemy of growth. And so the best thing we can do is create certainty for our businesses. So in the House, we voted to extend all of the tax rates for a year. That gives them certainty. Helping them to understand what is and isn't going to occur in order that they can hire, they can spend their capital. And we hear a lot of businesses are doing okay, but they're so concerned about the uncertainty that they sit on their capital thinking their taxes may go up, they may have more regulatory compliance. So I think certainty is a big issue for our businesses. But then we also have to send a message to them that the government doesn't have the answers. The answer to this economy lies in the private sector. And if you look at the stimulus, the Keynesian economics, this notion that the government spending money can create jobs, that's not, the law of economics is that the private sector is where those jobs are going to occur. And if we're going to really get this economy back on track, we got to free up the capital, we got to free up the markets, and let the private sector go where it will in order to create jobs and get the economy back on track. Well, a comprehensive energy policy, a policy that embraces all energy sources, and that includes wind and that includes solar. But comes to nuclear, we have nuclear power plants in the district. We should be building more nuclear power plants. Those are clean, those are safe, that's a tremendous source of energy. No permits have been issued since, I believe, the 70s. Keystone Pipeline, perfect example of how this administration and these policies have really failed energy exploration and have really just put, whether it's coal or oil, it's just this administration, the policies, the regulatory environment have really put the brakes on any energy exploration in this country. This country has the resources to be energy independent of the Middle East. But because of what the EPA is doing to our coal industry, to the oil industry, the refusal to issue permits for drilling, we're stalled. And I just passed a gas station, $4.04 a gallon. That's unconscionable. That is, I think, really a sign of a real failed energy policy on the part of this administration. For starters, the country does not have a taxing problem. We have a spending problem. So when you are spending as a nation $1.2 million more than we're taking in revenues, you're on a course that continues to accumulate debt, and that's what's happened right now. We spend over $1 trillion more than we collect in revenues. So the first thing you've got to do is you have got to stop spending money that you don't have. We're borrowing 42 cents on every dollar. That weakens this nation, and it's the wrong thing to do. I just spoke to some 5th graders, and one little girl raised her hand and she said, that debt's going to fall on our shoulders. And she's absolutely right, and it's morally unconscionable. So you've got to put a budget in place that's going to balance our budget as a nation over a period of time, which the Republicans put out a budget. I voted for Simpson Bowles. That was another solution, but the Senate doesn't act. And the last Congress didn't pass a budget. So it takes a bold vision to put something on paper and say, here's what we're going to do to get this country on a sustainable course, and a course where the goal is to balance the budget. We passed a balanced budget amendment in the House with the cut, cap, and balance bill. Unfortunately, that didn't go anywhere. We ended up with a disastrous Budget Control Act. But we've got to stop spending money we don't have. That is such a basic principle. Any household understands that. Any business understands that. And the United States has to understand that as well. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think raising taxes in this economic environment is absolutely a mistake. It is a mistake. It's estimated that if we raise taxes on those earning $200,000 or $250,000 as a couple, that we will lose 716,000 jobs in this country. That's Ernst & Young. That's not the Republicans saying that. You raise taxes. The last Congress knew that. The President knew that in 2010. They voted to extend those tax rates because it's going to adversely affect our small businesses. And I make it on purpose, go around and ask small businesses when I meet with them, when I tour their businesses, do you file a personal tax return? Do you file Subchapter S and LLC? And 65 or 70% of them don't file a corporate tax. They file these personal tax returns. So if you're going to raise taxes on those, that's who we're affecting, the small businesses. So raising taxes is not the way to go. You need a pro-growth economic agenda. You need to extend these tax rates, I believe, permanently. I think you've got to reduce capital gains, eliminate them possibly for a period of time. You got to reduce the corporate tax rate, which we did in the House, from 35 to 25%. You've got to send a message to businesses that we want you here, we don't want you to go overseas, and we're going to create an environment where that's fair. That's fair. Now, we just saw with Welsh Allen, the 2.3% tax, the excise tax from the Affordable Care Act. They're exempt from that tax if they go overseas. So they can save millions and millions of dollars by going overseas. And that's what happens when the government is heavy-handed with taxing or heavy-handed with regulations. I would extend those rates permanently, and they can now be called the Bush-Obama tax rates because the President and the last Congress, 111th Congress, voted to extend those rates because they knew in a fragile economy you don't raise taxes. That's the wrong way to go. So I would be in favor of extending those tax rates permanently, again, creating certainty for our small businesses. I would be in favor, as I mentioned, to reduce corporate taxes from 35 to 25%. But let me tell you a story. This is a perfect example about why raising taxes is the wrong way to go. I toured an electric company here locally, 40 employees, and she files a Subchapter S income tax return. She said to me, if you raise my taxes, my 40 employees will lose out on the 10% profit sharing that I have. I share my profits with my employees. You take away my bottom line and you tax me at a higher rate. That 10% profit sharing that those 40 employees would enjoy is gone. So we're not only affecting the business owners, we're affecting all of those in that like situation where there's profit sharing or where there's incentive to the employees. We're making it harder for them. We're taking money out of their pockets. And the fundamental issue with raising taxes is that you're taking money out of the private sector and you're using it to feed the government. And if the government was going to take that money and apply it to the national debt, that would be one thing. But the government will take that money and they'll waste it, and they'll use duplication of services, and they are not good stewards of the taxpayer dollars. So until you hold the government accountable for how they spend our money, and having sat on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee hearing and been involved in so many hearings, you see the duplication, you see the fraud, you see the waste and abuse in government. Until we get that under control, it's hard for me to justify raising taxes on the American people. Perfect example, TSA testified before the Oversight Committee. TSA has hundreds of millions of dollars of security equipment stored in Texas in a basement, all wrapped up in plastic, all taped up, hundreds of millions of dollars of equipment that they don't have the ability to deploy into the airports across this country. Now that's a waste. That's a waste of taxpayer dollars, and that's a perfect example of where we have to look at, what we have to do before we can ever justify raising taxes. We've got to make sure the government is spending money that's in the best interest of the American people. And you know, when we spend money, I mentioned it earlier, we're borrowing 42 cents on every dollar. Our liability to China, to Japan, I mean, our debt to them weakens the United States of America, and that's of great concern. Well, you know, I have spent the last 19 months, and one of the reasons I ran for Congress was because of the Affordable Care Act. And so I was opposed to it, just the 2,700-page document, the way it was passed, putting the federal government right in the middle of health care. I didn't like it. But what's happened over the last 19 months is I've heard firsthand from businesses, from seniors, from hospitals, from physicians, from Welsh Allen, from small medical device producers, how detrimental this law is going to be to them. So now I'm looking at it practically speaking. The law, and it was well intended, it was, we need health care reform, we need to reduce the cost of health care, we need to increase access to health care. That's all true. And there were some good parts about the Affordable Care Act. The keeping your kids on until they're 26, pre-existing conditions, those pieces should be incorporated in a new health care law. But they left out some glaring, some pretty obvious things if you're going to get the cost of health care down, one being tort reform, one being a way to encourage physicians and hospitals and providers not to practice defensive medicine. And so I think you got to have tort reform. Everyone is so disappointed that their use of health savings account is going to be phased out. People love health savings accounts. You can roll that money over. It's pre-tax dollars. It gives you power about how to spend your money. You can shop for services and products. Those are going to be phased out over time. Making sure you can buy insurance across state lines. You watch the insurance ads like Geico and Progressive and State Farm. They're all trying to get a piece of the market for auto insurance. What if you did that with healthcare insurance? What if you were able to buy it across state lines? You'd be seeing providers who right now have monopolies in certain areas of the country be competing for business. And when there's competition, you reduce rates. And when you reduce rates, you reduce the cost of healthcare. I have heard from so many people, it was my hairdresser who has Family Health Plus. And he was saying they just told him that it was Healthy New York, I'm sorry. His premiums are going to double next year. Double. You hear Blue Cross Blue Shield asking to raise their rates. So the Affordable Care Act, while it may have been the most well-intentioned piece of legislation, it isn't doing what it should be doing. And so everyone's got to take a step back and look at what true health care reform would look like. And I think it includes tort reform, buying insurance across state lines, making your insurance portable, and use of health savings accounts, some of the other things we've talked about. The reality about one of the problems we hear with the Affordable Care Act are the cuts to hospitals, the cuts to physicians. There's no SGR fix for the physician's Medicare reimbursement. And really what we hear most of all, and probably the most significant piece of the Affordable Care Act, is that $716 billion cut to Medicare. Because seniors are coming to us now and they're saying, my doctor won't take any more Medicare patients, or I can't find a doctor who will take Medicare patients because of that cut, and that cut in those services is going to be dramatic, and every senior is going to feel those cuts. I think that education needs to be more local. I think that the funding and the authority for education should be with the state government, far less with the federal government, because all that is down there is a bureaucracy, and they really don't know. This morning I was in the Moravia schools, the Cato schools. I was thinking that as I was walking on the campus of the Cato Meridian schools, what does Washington know about Cato Meridian and the needs of these kids? So to make education more local, I think makes much more sense, to give the states and the local governments and the school districts the autonomy and the authority and the funding to do what they do best, and they really care deeply and they know their kids the best within those school districts. I think you got to have school choice. I think parents in poor neighborhoods should have a choice. There should be a voucher system. If they want to send them to a charter school or a private school, they should have that choice. And the ones who are disadvantaged the most in education are the poor Americans. And of anyone who needs to we need to break the cycle is to get them into good schools. And unless you have school choice, you have vouchers and you have charter schools, they are the ones that are most disadvantaged. But there's this reluctance to look at education and to say, this isn't working. And this isn't a Democratic or Republican issue. This is a people issue. This is a moral failure on the part of this country to continue on in the way we're continuing on and not do anything about it, not make significant changes, and just cling to, and I don't want to, just the union leaders, because you know what? The teachers, the rank and file teachers are really, they're heroes. For the most part, they care deeply about these kids. Teaching is a mission. I saw that this morning in 2 schools that we spoke to, that they really want what's best for these kids, but they're hamstrung. They're hamstrung by the federal government. They're hamstrung by their union leaders who, will oppose any change, will oppose, one of the superintendents this morning said to me, they need to listen more to the teachers and to the people who are in the trenches as to how to reform education, and they don't. Government, Washington, they're oblivious. They're oblivious to the local needs of the schools, and I think that really therein lies the keeping education local. I think that we would do much better when it comes to education. Well, if you look at the record of the Department of Education and the money that's been spent, and what you mentioned earlier, our rankings in the world, the Department of Education should be abolished because they're a failure. They're a failure. Now, my opponent likes central planning. He likes Washington to be down there. He voted for the Affordable Care Act. He likes Washington to craft what's best for upstate New York. But you know what? Upstate New York knows what's best for upstate New York. And our teachers, our local teachers and superintendents, they should be the one establishing policies for their school. And so he wants to characterize me as being against public education. No, I'm very pro public education. And I've raised 6 children. I understand education. I understand that each child has individual needs, that has individual gifts and challenges, and local school districts know how to handle those far better than some nameless, faceless bureaucrat down in Washington. But that's what Dan Maffei likes. He likes big government. He wants the big government to solve all of our problems. Let's take Medicare first. Paul Ryan and the Republican budget that we passed has been demagogued, absolutely demagogued, now by the Democratic Party, by the president. That was a responsible look at how we're going to preserve and protect Medicare for our seniors and for those coming up. He presented a plan that would keep Medicare alive. The Medicare actuaries have predicted that Medicare is going to be bankrupt. You hear different dates. Some say 2024, some say 2026, some say 2017. Medicare, especially Part A, is going to be bankrupt. There is no trust fund. It's just a system that now every day you got 10,000 baby boomers retiring. You got the system overloaded. So you got to look at the system and you got to figure out how can we keep this system intact for your generation. Now, I'm on the cusp of Social Security, so it's pretty important to me. I got a mother who's 91. I know how important Medicare is for her. So, in Ryan's budget, what he proposes is that those who are 55 years and older are left alone. Nothing happens to them. And those 54 years and younger can make a choice. They can choose whether they want to stay on that same traditional Medicare program that exists now, or they can go and they can shop around for Medicare, and they can get their Medicare coverage through a private company. And if they do that, the government will give them premium support and pay their premium for whatever plan they choose. And that's based on your need, which is, I think, a good thing to do, because those most in need that government assistance, they will receive more premium support. So I think that's a reasonable way to look at this. It's a place to start the discussion. I mentioned I voted for Simpson Bowles. You got to start the discussion someplace. And he had the moral fortitude to put something out there, and the Republicans did. But the real threat to Medicare is the cut that occurs in the Affordable Care Act, the $716 billion. That's of concern to me for current seniors, and that's very different than Ryan's budget, because the Affordable Care Act affects all seniors right now who are receiving Medicare. So that's of concern to me, and the creation of that IPAD board is also going to cut services to Medicare recipients, and that's a problem. It's a huge problem. And when it comes to Social Security, again, you've got a system founded with the best of all intentions, but it was put together at a time when people weren't living as long as they are. I think we've got to be honest. You know, the American people are not stupid. The American people understand that if you can't run a program in the ground, you got to keep tweaking it. You got to keep adjusting it. You got to factor in changes that have occurred with people living longer, the cost of healthcare. You got to keep putting those things into the mix, or otherwise your program's going to be outdated, which both of those are in their current form. They can't. Medicare is unsustainable, and the federal government raided the Social Security Trust. They raided the Social Security Trust. So people have a vision that there's all this money down there, you know, Social Security Trust, where that's how the Social Security is getting paid out. Social Security right now is a pass-through. We all pay our FICA tax and our paycheck, and it gets paid out. You know, come October, the seniors will get their Social Security checks. There is no trust right now because there is no money. The system is really overtaxed. I think what we have done just a beautiful job at is our constituent service piece. And the relationships that we have built in the community, we've made in the community, and how we have helped the people who live in the community, who have come to us. We have opened and closed, you know, thousands of cases. People who came to us for a veterans issue or a Medicare issue or a Social Security issue. I was doing a parade in Palmyra on Saturday, and a woman came running out of the parade, and she said, "Thank you so much, you got my daughter." For 2.5 years, she tried to get her daughter on a medication for her Crohn's disease, and she called here, and with the help of one of our staff members, was able to get the insurance company to pay for Humira for her Crohn's disease. Those are great accomplishments. Using the authority and the force of this office to either hold agencies or hold entities responsible to the people who live here. That's really been very, very gratifying, and it's what I love best about this job. You know, the presidential appointment to the UN, I thought, was quite an honor. There were only 2 of us in the Congress, and that was just a huge honor. Have really appreciated that honor. Giving the weekly address was another honor. Another great thing that I just love are my Veteran Affairs Committee and what we are able to do for veterans. We had 2 local seminars for veterans, for people in the community to work together to give veterans what they need. That's very gratifying and very satisfying. You know, and this is very different from my opponent, I have lived here, I've worked here, I've volunteered here. Whether I'm the congressman or not, this is where I live, this is my home, this is where my kids were raised, my mother still lives here. I care deeply about this community, and I have a pride in this community, and I think that's really motivates me, and it motivates all my staff, the majority of who are local, to do what's right for this district, and that's been really a great accomplishment. I think that my deep roots in this community and my love of this community and my understanding of this community, you know, when you talk about education, I've raised 6 kids, and they've been some in public, some in private schools. So I get education as a mom and as someone who's so concerned about her kids' education. I have volunteered in this community. I've worked in this community. You know, I can be anywhere, at any event, in a grocery store, at church, and people that, you know, I've grown up with or have raised my kids with, I meet them and I know them. And that's very different from my opponent. And I think, you know, he came back here to run for Congress, and he comes back every 2 years to run for Congress. And I think that's very different. When you have a local person who is so invested in the community, I think the level of service, the level of connection, the communication piece is all that much better because I understand the community. And I care deeply about upstate New York. And I think that really is what we've done best, what we will continue to do best, and really why, you know, I certainly would be honored to have the support of the people who live in this district, because I do care very deeply about upstate New York.